then he walked and he grabbed me, he gave me a piece of paper over the toilet, the paper towel, and I put it inside where I had the bag of cleaning, what I was cleaning, the house.
Okay, did you see spilled coffee?
No, I didn't see that.
Did you see a coffee cup?
No, because I didn't look inside the car.
Did the paper towel smell like coffee?
No, I didn't smell it.
Well, still, you're holding that coffee stinks.
But I hold the paper towel, but I didn't smell it. I didn't see that.
But even still, you didn't smell coffee?
No.
You know how coffee is when you smell it, it stinks.
Yeah.
Smell it.
Welcome to Law and Crime Report, everybody. I'm Jesse Weber, and thanks for joining us. That was the police interview of Michelle Troconis, the woman who's charged in connection with the death of missing Connecticut woman Jennifer Farber Dulos. Now, Troconis had a court hearing, and there's a lot to break down there, including the fact that we've learned her co-defendant, Kent Mahini, is scheduled to testify in her trial, presumably against her. And Mahini was the former attorney who was friends with Fotis Dulos, Troconis' ex, and the man who was also implicated in the disappearance of Jennifer, his estranged wife. But as anybody who's been following this case knows, Fotis Dulos is dead. He committed suicide. Now, Mahini and Troconis each face conspiracy to commit murder charges. And let's begin with Troconis' attorney discussing those allegations against his client. Watch.
To say that the warrants set forth their case also raises the issue. I have filed now 2 motions to dismiss. There are several motions to suppress. Let me be clear, if it's not clear, I've alleged in those motions that the warrants themselves contain outright falsehoods, reckless disregards of the truth, and important and material omissions. Unfortunately, Your Honor, you can't hear those. By statute, and by the case law, you are prohibited from considering that.
So I'm aware of that, counsel. But also, there is 100 pages of details set forth in those various warrants. I know you allege inaccuracies or omissions, but to say you don't have information, how do you respond? The state did lay out very lengthy affidavits. The factual accuracy of that will have to await a determination by one of my colleagues, but it's not that you are bereft of information, is it?
Well, I'm bereft of evidence that would be admissible in court. I submit that what Kimball wrote in those warrants is mostly theory, speculation. It might be evidence admissible against Mr. Dulos if he was still a defendant in a case. If there was a case pending against Mr. Dulos, then the argument would be different as to whether or not the case should be consolidated against my client. But under the circumstances, almost everything that's set forth in that warrant has nothing to do with Miss Troconis. Even the pejorative remark by Mr. Cummings that there are alibi script. There's no such thing. There's a factually 99% accurate information, including her cell phone records, that were spelled out. And if the court ordered the release of the interrogation videos of my client, there's, I believe, 7-8 hours of that. She explains in that the divorce lawyer, Jacob Petranka, told Mr. Dulos to keep track of what was going on that Friday because he had gotten a report that Jennifer Dulos was missing, and they should keep track of their whereabouts.
Okay, a bunch of things to discuss. Joining me today is former senior homicide prosecutor Bernarda Villalona and psychologist Dr. John Delatorre. It's good to see you both. Bernarda, let me start with you. A lot of legal issues, and we're going to start with the big one here, that Kent Mahini might be testifying against Michelle Troconis. And I want to bring our attention to something because he was in jail for 10 months. Then he gets released on this reduced bond, and it's only after he gets released on bond, about 6 weeks after that, he met with state police prosecutor investigators. So it makes it look like he was released and is getting this favorable treatment, which is something that Michelle Troconis' attorney has said, because he's seeming to help the government now. What do you think?
So, Jesse, obviously all of this looks a bit shady just because of the coincidences that, he agrees to meet with the investigators, and all of a sudden, a couple of weeks later, he's being released with no opposition from the government. So what the judge was saying is that obviously because this defendant has some kind of financial hardship, and also because he had a family member that is very sick, that those are the reasons why the bail was lowered for him to make it more available for him to be released in this case. We know that the purpose of bail is to secure a person's presence at the time of trial. Either way, Jesse, the defense attorneys, the co-defendant's defense attorney is going to be able to cross-examine this co-defendant who is now flipping on the others at the time of trial. So that is a line of cross-examination that's going to be wide open for them.
Well, let's get inside of his mind, Dr. Delatorre, and the idea that you have this guy in this very precarious position. What would be his motivation to do this at this point in time? Presuming again that he does testify and that he is ultimately going to testify against his co-defendant.
Right. So I think there are a lot of things that are happening in his mind. He's spending all of this time in jail. He's fuming. His emotions are kind of building up over time. He's thinking about what exactly it is that is benefiting him by not talking. Then we have this other added emotional stressor with family members being sick. And so all of this other stuff is now weighing on him even more. And so now, without Fotis Dulos being around to kind of take the brunt of everything that's going on in the disappearance of Jennifer, now he's thinking about who could he talk to, can he get himself out of the situation, and the only person that's left is Michelle Troconis. So I think that's kind of what's going on. There's a lot of emotional buildup. Then there's this added stress outside. He's finally able to be released. He finally remembers what it's like to not be in jail anymore. And so now he's decided this is the time to flip and start working with the prosecution.
And Michelle Troconis' attorney filed a motion asking for information, quote, pertaining to consideration, rewards, understanding regarding favorable treatment, everything about why Kent Mahini would do this. And he said Mahini is now the star witness. A lot to break down there, but I really want to continue on with this, Bernarda, because there's something else that happened during this hearing. It's a question that the state wants to combine the cases of Michelle Troconis. Because, remember, she has 3 cases. She was arrested 3 times, facing tampering with evidence, hindering prosecution charges, and as I mentioned before, also these conspiracy to commit murder charges. Why does the state want to combine the cases, and why does the defense not want that?
So obviously what the state wants to do is combine all the cases, because when you combine all the cases, you're combining all the charges. So not only is she facing charges for the homicide, but she's also facing charges that makes her look even worse. And in the minds of the jurors, may even be to them more evidence that she is guilty of the homicide. So the prosecution wants to combine the cases, 1, for that reason, but 2, because the same witnesses that will be testifying in the other 2 cases are the same witnesses that are going to testify in the homicide case. So in terms of judicial economy, it makes sense that all 3 cases are combined. The judge is going to have to decide, though, whether it's too prejudicial to combine the cases. Of course it's prejudicial, but is it overly prejudicial? That is the question. But I think for judicial economy purposes, that all 3 cases are going to be combined. Now, of course, the defense will definitely object for the combining of these 3 cases because it looks bad on her, because you have additional testimony coming out that normally wouldn't come out if these cases weren't combined, and it makes her look bad. But in the end, it's going to be the same outcome. All 3 cases are going to be combined, and it makes sense.
It's an interesting legal argument. And just to take a step back here, remember, this is all about Jennifer Dulos, whose body has not been found. The authorities were actually trying to look back at a property owned by Fotis Dulos' real estate company. They were digging. They had ground-penetrating radar. They were using an excavator. And the question, of course, is, did they find anything? We don't know. I mean, her body has not been officially found yet. There have been no indications of that. But I want to go back to one of the troopers at this home in Farmington, Connecticut, talking more about the search.
As many of you are aware, over the past day or so, our Western District Major Crime Squad detectives have been on the property, following up on leads and continuing to investigate investigate the disappearance of Jennifer Dulos. Again, this investigation is still active and ongoing. At this point, we do not have any updates to provide to the public, and we do require or request that any updates moving forward or any requests for information moving forward be directed to the Chief State's Attorney's Office. That will be able to provide you with any significant updates or significant updates to the investigation. And at this point, that's what we have to say regarding the investigation. Our main goal is to, again, work towards providing the family of Jennifer Dulos some closure, and our detectives will continue to work tirelessly in the direction of doing so. Thank you all.
Okay, Dr. Delatorre, let's take a step back also and think about Michelle Troconis for a second, because her alleged role in this, why would she have been involved here? I was presuming, of course, she was involved. Why would she do this?
Well, it depends on when she became involved. And I think what we need to understand is if it was Fotis Dulos who committed this crime, then this was something that he had planned for a very long period of time. And we know this because we still can't find her body. If this was something that he just that it just happened, then it's most likely that he would have made a mistake and Jennifer's body would have been found. Now, when Michelle Troconis gets involved, will let us know a little bit more of why she became involved. Is it possible that she could have been involved from the beginning? If Fotis was kind of talking to Michelle about how he doesn't love Jennifer, about how Jennifer doesn't treat him right, if he was saying negative kinds of things about Jennifer to Michelle, that probably would have been something that would have aligned Michelle to Fotis to then commit this crime. If it happens later on, maybe she stumbles onto Fotis doing this crime, so then she feels compelled. Maybe he forces her to do this, and now she's kind of stuck because Fotis is dead, and he's the only one that can confirm that she was kind of manipulated into this. It really just depends on when Michelle actually became involved.
Now, Bernarda, all the evidence points to the fact that the outcome of Jennifer Dulos is not good, that she's not alive, that she was murdered. However, there's no body. And I'm curious, and you see these arguments brought up by the defense attorneys that, you don't have a theory of murder yet. You can't even definitively prove what happened, what didn't happen. If Jennifer's body is found, how does that change the case against Troconis and against Mahini?
So if her body is found, obviously it makes the case much stronger because it is a weak case or a weaker case when you're dealing with prosecuting a homicide, and the most essential element of a homicide, of a murder, is that a death took place, that a homicide took place, that the person died as a result of the actions of the defendants. Here, the big problem is that you don't have that. You don't have the body. You don't have the autopsy of the body. You don't have the cause of death. But more importantly, you have that question is that could she still be alive? If she can still be alive, then you can't convict someone of murder. That's why it's important, and I believe why the prosecutor is seeking to have the testimony of the co-defendant, Mahini, to testify against this woman, because he will be able to fill in the gaps as to why the jury should believe that this woman, Miss Dulos, is actually dead. And that is really important in this prosecution and in the prosecution of any homicide case. The number one issue would be for the defense, where's the body?
Yeah, and I want to ask you one quick question more about this, Bernarda, before we go. The judge denied the defense's request to have the GPS monitor removed from Troconis, cited a number of reasons, but ultimately the judge said no. What do you think about that decision? What was the rationale? Is that the right move here?
Well, I think it was the right move because the reason why Troconis was requesting that the ankle monitor be removed from her ankle is because she was saying, that she's not able to go snowing, skiing with her kids because she can't get the boot over the ankle monitor. Really? No.
Right.
So the judge was like, well, if there was a wrist monitor, then maybe I would grant that, but none exists. But there's no reason to remove the ankle monitor. You are out pending trial, and these are one of the parameters they put in place. So instead of being in jail, you can be home in the streets.
A lot of moving parts in this case, and it's one we're going to continue to follow here on Law and Crime. But when we come back, we're going to switch gears and talk about a murder-for-hire plot that went horribly wrong. We'll be back. And welcome back, everybody. 3 men in Louisiana have been arrested and face murder charges in connection with an assassination plot that led to the death of an unintended target. Officials say Bo Cormier recruited Andrew Eskeen and Dalvin Wilson to kill a woman who was accusing Cormier of rape and planned to testify against him. But instead, authorities say that when Wilson came looking for the victim, a woman named Brittany Cormier, the sister of Bo, posed as the victim to protect her, and Wilson shot her to death along with a neighbor, Hope Nettleton. Let's start with the sheriff talking about the charges against these men.
Bo hired basically Andrew Eskon and Dalvin Wilson to murder the rape victim so she cannot testify. Both Andrew and Dalvin traveled to Montague to conduct surveillance on the residence sometimes after July, but before November. On November 2020, Andrew and Dalvin returned to Montague to commit the homicide using a family member's vehicle, but it was a failed attempt. On January 13th, Dalvin used Andrew's truck to commit the murder.
Bernarda, if we look at the charges here, right, all three face 2 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of criminal conspiracy to commit murder, 1 count of attempted first-degree murder, and then Cormier faces a solicitation charge. They have different roles here. Does that change whether or not there will be a successful prosecution of all three? Are their cases different? Because, again, they weren't all there in that room, allegedly, according to the authorities.
So when you're dealing with conspiracy charges or accomplice charges, what the most important element of those charges is that you are still held accountable for the actions of the other participants. That's why they include the conspiracy as a part of either an element or a charge of a crime itself. So in for a penny, in for a pound. You were all a part of it and you helped execute this crime. So that's why all three of them are being charged. Now, what I would say is that possibly because everyone had a different role, that maybe that will have an effect as to whether the prosecutor will seek the death penalty. Because we know for sure the person that is eligible for the death penalty is the actual shooter. So he is facing the death penalty. However, for the other two, there can be mitigating factors that they weren't actually the trigger person in this horrific homicide.
Dr. Delatorre, I think a lot of our viewers might be surprised to learn this happens a lot more than we think, these murder-for-hire plots. They happen a lot. We've covered a bunch of them here on Law and Crime. What goes into the motivation here? So if you start with Cormier to hire these 2 men to do this, and then from these men to accept it, explain the rationale, the thought process behind this.
I think when we deal with Cormier specifically, he doesn't care about people at all. I mean, look at the original crime for which he then needed to hire some hitmen. He doesn't care about women. He doesn't care about people. He only sees people as objects, something to be used, a tool to be used. I'm sure he didn't care about these 2 guys either. I'm sure he thought that they would end up getting caught. I think he was trying to use sort of an insulating device, these 2 guys, to commit this crime and make it probably seem like it was some kind of other kind of issue and that he would have been caught. He never would have been found. This is the kind of guy who doesn't care about people. This is why he's smart enough to not be involved in this higher level, right? The murder, and be the actual shooter. He's smart enough to have some kind of, to be insulated from it. Now, obviously, his access to assassins and hitmen is very limited in where he is. And so I think he's someone who definitely doesn't care about people.
And then Bernarda, real quick here, we see a lot of these times these plots do fall apart here. I mean, we have a woman who literally posed as the victim to save her life, and she gave up her own. These plots do fall apart, and I'm curious to know that the actual victim, in this case, the rape victim, what role she's going to play in the prosecution of all these three.
So it's so sad because this is a prosecutor or a victim or witness's worst nightmare. Because here you have this rape victim that after being brutally violated already and made a victim, you have someone trying to shut her up by killing her, by getting rid of her, so there is no rape prosecution. So that fear, it's one that you can't get over. But I will say this, what's going to happen during her rape trial is that testimony is going to come into play of how Cormier actually tried to get rid of her, having her killed in order to have this prosecution dismissed. So that's going to play a part because it's a consciousness of guilt. And I'll be surprised if Cormier's rape case is not put together with the homicide case.
Right. Yeah, it's a sad case all around from beginning to end of it. I want to move over now to something else, and I want to move over to R. Kelly because he's back in the news. Well, maybe not even him. I should say a co-defendant of his, a man named Richard Arlene Jr., has pleaded guilty to bribing a woman to not testify or cooperate in the prosecution of the R&B singer. Now, Kelly, of course, is facing a slew of charges in different states related to him allegedly sexually abusing women, but this particular incident stems from his racketeering case in Brooklyn. And Mr. Arline Jr. Intended to pay this victim somewhere between $300,000 and $500,000. There are different reports about the actual money to keep her quiet. Let's actually start from understanding this case. Let's go back to when R. Kelly had that infamous interview with Gayle King. We'll start there.
But I'm not talking about the one case in which you were acquitted. I'm talking about the other cases where women have come forward and said, R. Kelly had sex with me when I was under the age of 18. R. Kelly was abusive to me emotionally and physically and verbally. R. Kelly took me in a black room where unspeakable things happened. This is what they're saying about you. These aren't old rumors.
Not true. Whether they're old rumors, new rumors,
why would they
future
say this
rumors,
about you?
Not true.
Well,
how stupid would it be for R. Kelly, with all I've been through in my way, way past, to hold somebody, let alone 4, 5, 6, 50, you said. How stupid would I be to do that?
I didn't say you were holding.
That's stupid, guys.
I didn't.
Is this camera on me?
Yes, it's on.
That's stupid. Use your common sense. Don't forget the blogs. Forget how you feel about me. Hate me if you want to, love me if you want, but just use your common sense. How stupid would it be for me to, with my crazy past and what I've been through, right now I just think I need to be a monster and hold girls against their will, chain them up in my basement, and don't let them eat and don't let them out unless they need some shoes down the street from their uncle. Robert, stop it. Y'all quit playing. Quit playing. Robert. I didn't do this stuff. This is not me, y'all. I'm fighting for my life. Y'all killing me with this. I gave out 30 years of my career.
Robert.
30 years of my career. Y'all trying to kill me. You're killing me, man. This is not about music. I'm trying to have a relationship with my kids, and I can't do it. Y'all just don't want to believe the truth. You don't want to believe it.
At this point, we briefly pause the interview to give Kelly a moment. His publicist helped calm him down.
I hope this camera keep going.
No, we're going to let the camera keep rolling.
This is not true. Doesn't even make sense. Why would I hold all these women?
Never gets old watching that. Dr. Delatorre, I want to start with you because R. Kelly's kind of like a character study, right? And when we talk about this guy pleading guilty to bribing one of his victims here, or alleged victims, it gives this idea of R. Kelly's power and influence over these women. Can you speak about that?
Yeah, and I think what we need to look at, especially from that clip, is there'll be some questions as to whether or not R. Kelly's emotions are true. I would say that they are true, but part of my practice is working with and treating offenders. And when I look at that clip, what I see is someone that is engaged in what we call reconstitution. This is someone who is trying to actively make other people believe that they are not capable of committing some kind of offense, whether it's sexual abuse or any other kind of criminal behavior or anything like that. Someone is truly believing in the emotional state that they are not capable and want others to believe that they are not capable of doing these kinds of crimes. So what we're looking at then is all of these other people become groomed, right? All of the people that surround him are groomed into believing that everything R. Kelly does is right, it's correct. It's other people that are misinterpreting. It's other people who are looking at his behaviors in a negative light. It's never R. Kelly's fault. That's the part of power and control that R. Kelly has. That's the influence that he has on all of the people surrounding him, whether they're a victim or whether they're part of his quote unquote team, all of that. So it's power and control, and it's him using that influence to manipulate their emotions to align themselves with him.
Bernarda, this guy who pleads guilty, somebody you can just presume is in R. Kelly's inner circle, his sentencing, scheduled for June 9th, faces 15 years in prison. I imagine he is going to play a role, maybe a very important role for the government in the prosecution of R. Kelly. Am I wrong? Am I thinking about this the wrong way, or is this just, we should just ignore this?
Oh, R. Kelly should be thinking about that. This is exactly what's going to happen. His legal team should know by now that this is going to be a huge possibility, because this man, Mr. Arlene, was willing to go and offer a victim $300,000 in order to protect his friend R. Kelly. What does that tell you? That tells you that Mr. Arlene, one, knows where the dirt is hidden on R. Kelly. And that dirt is the information and the evidence that the prosecutors are going to need and are going to want to secure a prosecution in this case, especially when you have victims who are saying they are not victims, complainants that are saying they are not victims, but because they have been brainwashed, they are not able to see that they are victims. So this right here, with 15 years hanging over the head of Mr. Arlene, Mr. Arlene is going to be singing at R. Kelly's trial.
I want to get more into this. There's a lot more to get into when it comes to R. Kelly because he's facing so many charges. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, that's what we'll focus on. Stay tuned. And welcome back, everybody. We're still talking about the fact that a co-defendant of R. Kelly, a man named Richard Arlene Jr., has pleaded guilty to bribing one of the women who was planning on testifying against R. Kelly in his Brooklyn trial, where he faces racketeering charges. A lot to break down there, but if we go back, R. Kelly's represented by Stephen Greenberg, who's actually appeared on Law&Crime before. And here's a moment when he was defending his client against the obstruction charges that he also faces. A slew of charges that this man faces in different states. Take a look.
There's no evidence that Robert Kelly or anyone associated with Robert Kelly has tried to obstruct these federal investigations, has tried to obstruct the state investigations, has done anything wrong in connection with the Lifetime series or any of that. In fact, we have spoken to a couple of these alleged victims, and they have admitted lying to him about their age, lying to other people about their age, trying to extort money from him. They're angry if they didn't get paid. It's all going to come out, and at the end of the day, he's going to walk out those doors of this courthouse. In a court, in the state court here, was appended to our pleadings today. We're not afraid of that document. There's no threats in that document. There was some photos that individual sent to Mr. Kelly, very revealing photos, and he did say to her, as part of that document, and we didn't file this in the court, but he did say to her, look, do you want this stuff that you sent to me to become public? Because if you're pursuing a public lawsuit, these things that you sent to me that are revealing are going to become public. That's the so-called intimidation. Hey, maybe you may want to rethink this because of your own actions and the things you sent to me.
Bernarda, as we listen to this and we think about the guilty plea that this guy just took, Arlene Jr., and we think about that two other individuals associated with R. Kelly, Donald Russell and Michael Wilson, who themselves are accused of intimidating or threatening accusers from coming forward and helping with the prosecution, it seems saying R. Kelly didn't have a role in this is going to be more tough, right? I mean, what is the defense here? And I imagine it's going to be harder for the defense. What do they say? That these actors just acted on their own, that R. Kelly had no idea that this was going on? Is that how he and his defense team are going to have to fight against this new development?
So, as part of these new allegations, the huge defense for the defense team is to be able to show that R. Kelly did not have any involvement with the actions of these soul warriors, these soul soldiers. So that is what the defense is going to have to show, because if you can't show a connection that R. Kelly directly ordered these people to act on his behalf, then you can't hold R. Kelly accountable for their actions. So what they're going to look into, and what they should look into, is who visited R. Kelly in jail. What conversations has he had over the phone? Because your phone conversations are being recorded when you call from a jail. So those are things they're going to have to look into. What I would say about this prosecution is that, yes, this attorney, he is a good attorney. You are dealing with New York. You are dealing with sexual allegations. You are dealing with the federal system. And in a case like this, I think what he should do is add a strong female defense attorney on his team to be able to make these arguments and not be looked at as this horrible person. Because in the end, you are downgrading victims of sexual assault, and that may be used against you when it comes to a jury verdict.
Sounds almost like what the Harvey Weinstein team did with hiring Donna Rotuno to be one of the lead defense counsels. So maybe they'll ultimately do that with these trials coming up. But Dr. Delatorre,
and they should they should get a New Yorker. Sorry, Jesse, I was saying that
maybe they will. Maybe they will.
Is definitely get a New Yorker, because you're dealing with New York jurors.
And maybe they will, and maybe that's ultimately what will happen, because that trial is going to come up. But Dr. Delatorre, let's assume for a moment that R. Kelly really did direct his associates to intimidate these women, bribe these women. What is that about? Is that about control? Is that about trying to say, this isn't going to happen to me, to control your situation? I'm not a psychologist. You are. Explain it to me.
It is a little bit about control, but it's more about power. And it's about power in this way. R. Kelly has been famous for a very long time, and he has a lot of money, and he's done a lot of things. These kinds of things can influence a person's decision making, making it seem like they are essentially above the law, or that actions that they take will not be held against them, whether they're positive actions or especially if they are negative actions. And because of money and because of power, he's able to get Confederates on his team that I could easily see some of these people saying, no, R. Kelly didn't know, I acted on my own. I could easily see him having these kinds of people around him as insulating. That's what power does. Power is corruptible. And so it's easy to see that R. Kelly would use his power. It's a little bit about control as well, but it's more about the influence that money has, the influence that fame has, in getting people to do whatever it is that he wants them to do.
Let's switch gears from, one musician who's charged with serious crimes to now another one. Rapper Silento has been charged with killing his 34-year-old cousin in Atlanta. Now, authorities say the rapper, whose real name is Ricky Lamar Hawk, shot and killed Frederick Rooks. There's still no clear motive here. There seems to be a lot of videotape evidence. Bernarda, I'll start with you on this. What do you make of this? This is a guy who really burst onto the scene, became super famous. Before I came on, I looked. His hit song had over, I think, 1 billion views. And now this? What do you make of it?
So it's sad because, one, the world does know who this rapper is. You may not know his name, but you definitely know his song with the Nene, because not only was it a song that was a huge hit, but also the dancing that became a huge hit all around the country. So it's sad that unfortunately at this point that this man who was at the top of his game at some point is now facing murder charges, and not just murder charges, but for killing and assassinating his own cousin. Because at the scene, they found 8 shell casings, and his cousin was shot not only in the face, but also in the arm. So that shooting of the face itself is horrible.
Dr. Delatorre, one of the things that came out after this is his publicist said, over the past several years, Ricky has been suffering immensely from a series of mental health illnesses. We know that Silento has actually previously talked about his struggles of depression. How does all that factor into what he's dealing with now?
Well, I think it's important to understand that mental health issues don't cause someone to commit violence. I think what was going on was that as his mental health issues were not being treated, he started viewing the world in a much more different way than he had previously. The worldview that he had probably became very sickening. It probably became very contentious. It probably became very paranoid. There are a lot of things that a mental health issue can lead someone to start thinking about the world around them. It's not the cause of the violence, but it certainly didn't help him in stopping the behavior that he ultimately ended up doing, and easily could have been influenced by any illicit substances that he may or may not have taken. Right? There's a lot of stuff that we still need to know about what was going on just before he committed this crime, before we can truly know what his role was just prior to committing murder.
And we may be talking a bit prematurely here, but let's get into it a little bit, because Bernarda, could that be a possible defense here, considering the fact that based upon what we know, there's a lot of videotape evidence, security cam footage. There's several cars were fleeing the scene. You see this footage, and when you have this documentary footage, it's interesting to know that it seems like a strong case. I don't know if we still have Bernarda with us. I'm waiting to see. If not, okay, I don't think we have Bernarda, so I'm going to go back to Dr. John for a second. Doctor, we don't know what the motive is, but to kill someone's own cousin, if that's the case, a family member, is that different? Is that a different analysis than any other kind of homicide?
It can be, especially if the relationship as cousins were pretty strong. The issue then becomes the amount of times that he shot this person, including, as Bernarda mentioned, the person got shot in the face. So there's a lot of personal issues that are indicated in this behavior. So I think, particularly he could have viewed his cousin as betraying him in some way, which led to, because one shot will do, right? One bullet to the face would do, but then it ended up being 8 different shots altogether. So absolutely, the role of the relationship between cousins could have played a factor.
All right. I wish we could talk a little bit more about this, but we do have to hit a break. When we come back, I want to finish about a really, really sad shooting out in Oklahoma that if you didn't hear about, there's a lot to talk about there. We'll be right back. Okay, welcome back, everybody. I want to talk about a shooting that happened out in Oklahoma that has claimed the lives of 5 children and 1 man. And right now, we do have a suspect in custody. And his name is suspected 25-year-old Jaron Dijon Pridgen. And he's been taken into custody. The motive at this point is not clear. But we did hear from police officer Lynn Hamlin, told the Associated Press that it was not random, obviously, because they all did live in this home together. But as far as what all those relationships look like, we just don't know that yet. Bernarda, I start with you. We have no charges announced yet. Clearly not a lot of information. What can we expect to play out in terms of what the charges will be, what information will be made to the public, what motive will be? What are you looking out for?
So right now, the key word that we have to focus on is that he has been arrested and he is a suspect. That he is a suspect. He hasn't been arrested yet. So just being a suspect, unless there are formal charges, they haven't determined based on their investigation that this person's the actual shooter. So many of times with homicide prosecutions is that you have multiple suspects and they're bought in or they determine based on their investigation that that person wasn't involved. So hence they are not arrested and charges aren't brought against them. This is going to be a huge case. It's something that that town has not seen in many, many years, especially when you're dealing with that young kids were killed. It takes a special person, a cold-hearted person, to be able to take a gun and take away the innocent life of young kids. So definitely what we expect to see is that that town is going to use all their resources to find out who is responsible for the homicide of these 5 individuals.
Let's get into that, because Dr. Delatorre, assuming it's him, maybe it's somebody else, to take the lives of children, especially when you have ages 1, 3, 5, 6, and 9. You heard Bernarda say it. What is your analysis of what kind of person would do that?
Right. So I think we need to probably unpack Bernarda's comment of cold-hearted. And what I would say is this. To kill 1, much less 5 children, all under the age of 11, does take an individual who is constantly thinking about how they would be capable of doing that. Essentially, what they are doing is deadening their emotions to what it would take to actually pull the trigger and kill these children. So in that sense, Bernarda's right, in that the individual can probably appear as being cold-hearted, but it's not something that they just came to fairly easily. It's probably something that they had considered over a long period of time. So I wouldn't be surprised if it is this suspect, or if whoever it was that actually committed this crime, if we find out that this was something that had long been planned, that there was something else that was going on inside the shooter's mind that the person was focused and ruminating on over a long period of time, getting themselves to a place where they can actually commit this full behavior. So in that sense, yes, it's cold-hearted, but it's not something that just happens in a snap. So it is certainly a tragedy. It is certainly somebody that has worked very hard to get themselves to a point to commit this crime.
Dr. John, sticking with you for a second, the school district has said that they're going to make counseling services available to the kids in the elementary school where these victims attended, and they said, we will make every effort to help our students and staff through this difficult time. What do they need to do? What do they need to tell these children?
The staff is one thing. I think the staff, you can interact with them using traditional grief support therapies. The children, however, can be extremely complicated. Dealing with children requires the therapist to deal with them in an age-appropriate way. Some children are not ready to have a conversation about that, and some children are. Some children are ready to have knowledge of what actually happened, and some children are not. So I think what's clear here is that you have to take each child one by one, individually, to figure out where they are developmentally, and then present information to them that they can easily comprehend, that they can easily understand. Sometimes it might be better to not even bring it up at all. And sometimes it might be better to just confront the issue directly in a way that they can understand. But this is going to be a very difficult process for these grief therapists.
Yeah, I can only imagine. And as Bernarda said, being a prosecutor on this kind of case, when you're dealing with the death of children, young children, there's a lot at stake there, as Bernarda said, and there are going to be a lot of eyeballs on this case, particularly in that community, because it really did shock everyone. We're talking about a case that happened in a local community, but now everybody across the country is talking about it. So maybe we will continue to follow it here on Law&Crime Report and determine whether or not that suspect is in fact the one who did commit this awful, awful crime. All right, Bernarda, Dr. Delatorre, I appreciate you both taking the time here on Law&Crime Report. Everyone out there, thank you for joining us. We covered the biggest trials, the biggest cases happening across the country. We're back daily, 12 p.m. Eastern. Until next time, be safe.